Greetings, this is Griff Ruby, the Nostalgic Catholic, with yet another Isaac Asimov review. This time is another short story from 1961, this time in the October 1961 issue of Fantasy and Science Fiction. And sadly, as usual, the only artwork this has is on the cover, and whatever this is not from that story. It does, however, at least have Asimov's name on the cover because it's got a story from him. And of course, it's called out in the table of contents as The Machine That Won the War. Isaac Asimov, page 51. Okay, so let's see what we have here at page 51. Again, there's just a small blurb title by Isaac Asimov, and the whole thing is 5 pages. Yeah, that's it. 5 pages. It's a very short story. Now, there's a blurb here. This story is collected into Nightfall and Other Stories, by the way. So it's a very easy story to find. It's very short, so it's towards the very end. They're in here chronologically, and there's only a handful of stories that this book has selected since that, so it's almost to the very end. There is, however, something worth commenting on here. And there was one small change to the text that I noted, and I might as well just get that out of the way here. It starts, all of this is just the jubilation and joy and happiness. We've been fighting this war for obviously a very long time against the Danubians, whatever they are. Okay, but at any rate, we finally have had a victory. Major military victory. They are beat back so far. They're never going to take us on again, if indeed they even still exist. So I mean, this is a totally, clear total win. Congratulations. Okay. There's one statement in the original as published that kind of bothered me. It's like I couldn't make sense of this. It says, okay, I'll miss it all in a grisly fashion. Miss having this war going. It's hard to remember when we weren't at war with Deneb, and it seems against nature now to be at peace, and to look at the stars with anxiety. Why would we have to look at the stars with anxiety now? That was a mistake, a mistrick, whatever you want to call it. He corrected it when he gathered it into the Nightfall collection. And now we read it here. I'll miss it all after a grisly fashion. It's hard to remember when we weren't at war with Deneb, and it seems against nature now to be at peace and to look at the stars without anxiety. Yeah, suddenly we can look at the stars and we don't have to wonder who out there is going to get us. We're not at war anymore. It's over. Peace, happiness, jubilation. Okay. So that's the one change that didn't need to make. Now it makes more sense. The original was, a typo. Okay. Now there is, of course, the blurb, which does not get gathered up into the collection, and this blurb bears a small bit of discussion. Okay. It reads, the demands that magazines and book publishers have been making in recent years on Dr. Asimov's science nonfiction talents have brought his fiction output virtually to a halt. We are delighted that we were successful in chivying him into producing this story, particularly because it illuminates so neatly an aspect of computer uses ordinarily left undeveloped in current scientific reports. Okay. Well, you notice the comment. There are very, very few. His fictional output is trailing off. This is the second story of 1961. This and the one before it, the Playboy and the Girls of the Slime God, or what is this thing called Love? It got retitled. I should have mentioned that. Maybe I should put it in the comments for that. But at any rate, it got retitled and gathered up into the well, any other collection really. It's pretty much been retitled. Playboy and the Slime God, that's what it was. But it got retitled into being called What Is This Thing Called Love? Well, it's a nice nondescript title. Takes away the zing of the original, I think, but whatever. But that's another story. That one and this one are his sole and entire fictional output for 1961. Indeed, for the previous year, 1960, his sole fictional output was one segment among 5 of a round-robin story called The Covenant, and his third entry made on the Theotimeline series, which for the first time contains just barely enough of a narrative to even qualify as kind of a story at all, and therefore be something I can cover in this series of stories. And then that brings in the other earlier entries, which are absolutely not stories in any way, shape, or form whatsoever. But now at least I can cover those items because they were, kind of famous productions of his, even gathered up into the early Asimov. So, it's a good way to bring those in, even though they're not stories. So that's 2 stories in 1960, barely. 2 stories in 1961. I think we have a little more. Certainly the Playboy and the Slime God story, was a real story. Humorous, satire was good. And now we get up to this one, The Machine That Won the War. Well, we finally have, once again, for the first time in a while, it's a Multivac story. There has been Multivac. Apparently it was being used strategically in helping to figure out what we're going to do in the war. Now, this whole story is just these 3 guys, celebrating humanity's victory and enjoying the glow of having just won a major war. And, okay, that's great. And 3 guys, one of them has a job gathering and providing data for Multivac. Another one is obviously in charge of Multivac, its maintenance, and so forth. And the third guy was somebody in the state who everyone knew when you're in the state, you don't get very good information. You just don't. That's a reality that can't really be overcome very well, because it's like everyone wants to make themselves look good and so forth, and maybe other people look bad, all kinds of different stuff. And you're trying to sort through all this stuff and find out what's really going on, even if you're conscious of that. And many times they're not. Fortunately, this guy clearly was. And yet somehow we could still win. I mean, we apparently had lost a serious source of spy input some time ago during the war. That should have put us at a significant disadvantage. It probably did. But everyone was thinking, and it was kind of a neat detail in here, oh, well, we've got Multivac on our side. The Denebians don't have anything equivalent to that. There's a great morale factor, which may well have contributed significantly to the fact of our victory. But there's still the detailed battle strategies, and the information had to be massaged, being fed into Multivac. The one guy felt bad about having done that. But then there was the guy who was maintaining Multivac. He didn't have his usual crew of people to maintain it, because a lot of those people were having to maintain a whole bunch of other computers far afield here and there, to the point that he's got a skeleton crew, and he's having to bring in these young pups who don't know anything about anything, so he feels they can't be trusted. I mean, not that they would be deliberately doing anything wrong, but they're young and inexperienced, can make serious mistakes. That could be very costly. Though not that we would seriously expect anybody intends to. And on the other side, some old-time veterans who may be kind of old and rusty and maybe a bit out of date, but they're the only people who might have worked in their way back when, and now they're pulled out of retirement. And now, you remember how I used to maintain this? What did I do? Yeah, I think I changed out tubes that burned out, and what else did I do? So he's had to work with a Multivac that is not in the greatest state of maintenance. And then you had the third guy realizing, well, it's a good thing that, sure, I took your inputs into account, but then I made a lot of decisions using a little machine of my own. It's a good one. It's a good little climax. Be careful not to read the last paragraph or two until you've read the story, because it's a very major spoiler, and I'm not going to tell you what that machine is. But it was very helpful in the state guy's job in making decisions about wartime battle strategies. An excellent machine, actually, from the standpoint of battle strategy, by the way. A very ancient one, too, I might add. So, it really, Multivac may have helped in terms of, from the standpoint of morale of the fighters out there more than anything else. But it was this other machine that helped him to make his important decisions, military decisions. Probably that and a certain knack for a lot of basic military strategies anyway. But yeah. So I will leave it at that. It's a very short story. The climax, if you don't see it coming, is a really good zinger. And I think it holds up. So once again, another score for Asimov, science fiction, and it's funny. He has, once again, hit that bullseye target of what it takes to be genuinely humorous. And that's another story. But as I said, his fictional output is winding down. And in fact, as we get into the next year, 1962, once again, he will have exactly 2 stories published that year. Apparently, he did write one other, but it doesn't come out except as a children's book in 1971. When we get to that point, assuming I do, I hope to, I can cover the story when it comes out, because I'm doing these in the order they see the light of day, not the order that he wrote them. But as far as publication, he wrote 2 short stories in 1962, and those will be my next couple of reviews. But for 1963, he hasn't written a thing. For 1964, he hasn't written a thing. There is a story that came out in 1964 from way back when, but we'll cover that when we get to it. But he didn't write it recently. It had been a long time before, and it now finally saw print after decades. But it wasn't totally a dire period for Asimov fiction. We are looking at the same era, maybe about the end of 61, beginning of 62. I still can't get a clear assertion of the dates involved here, in which the 3 Foundation volumes and the iRobot volume were finally obtained from Gnome Press and now made available on Doubleday. And now, instead of this tiny little thing that most people might have been excused for not even knowing existed, it becomes this big thing. More, and for 90% of the reading public, the first time they saw this new material of Asimov, new fiction. So, other than the small percent who had either read the stories on the pages of Astounding Science Fiction or Astonishing Story in the one case of the early robot story, or else read the Gnome Press editions or any of the very flawed paperback editions that probably did more to mutilate the stories than anything else. You got everybody else who just either ignored them, didn't know about them, or, well, they kind of heard of it, but they didn't see it anywhere, and they just, moved on with life without it. Now, even though he's not writing anymore, new Asimov material hits the market. Well, new to most of the readership, anyway. So, it's not totally a dry period, but, as I said, his fictional output, in terms of written at that time, is just winding down. It's like it's almost over. And that is a rather interesting thing. He had a lot of stuff to write. Sputnik had been launched, and there was fear that the Americans would really get left behind. So he needed to do something. Well, enough of all that. Thanks for listening.